and now it is completely buried again. What's up, Patreon supporters? We'll start this one out with the puppers. Hi, Nava. Hi, baby. Hello. Hi, cutie. Wiley. Watch this. Wiley loves snow. Check this out. Wiley. Hey, Wiley. Oh, she's gonna pee first. Wiley. Nava's not as much of a fan. She's usually like, screw that, I don't want nothing to do with it. But Wiley will just play. She does the same thing with water. So, back to car stuff, but I know y'all love the doggos, I do too. Look what I got. It's the matching set for that, which if you watched the last video, you'll obviously know. And now I know why it was delayed. You can see it's all wet on this side, so clearly the brake fluid was not drained enough, and I will open this up. I guess I'll just tell you the story of what happened to it while I open it. So, basically, I got a notice like a few days after I got the first side that said this one was delayed in transit and that it would be here sometime, basically. It really didn't say when. And the issue was that I didn't know if they had, found the label, but the contents had been lost or what, so I was worried I'd never see it. But then, a few days later, I did get a message saying it was moving, and then they said that they got into Linenville, which is not far from me, at like 9 in the morning. And then allegedly, I got a text saying it was delivered at 10 in the morning. And I went out and checked the mailbox, and there was nothing there. And I was a bit confused, needless to say. So when the mailman got here, I was like, hey, do you have a package for me? He's like, no. And I gotta let the dogs back inside pretty soon. But I showed him my texts. I was like, I got a notification saying I was supposed to get this. And he was like, I don't know, that's really weird. He's like, it says delivered? And I'm like, yeah, it says delivered at like 10 in the morning. So he calls the office, and eventually I hand him my cell phone so he can read the tracking number and stuff. I'm like, I'm just worried somebody else has it. He's like, yeah, I think that's what happened. He's like, I don't remember delivering anything, though. And so he calls the office, and they're like, well, it looks like it's here on the map. And he's like, oh. He's like, you know what? Now I remember. He's like, I delivered it to such and such a house on this road. Their last name was one letter different than mine, and their street number was one number different than mine. So he just, because the box was so messed up and the label was all covered with plastic wrap and brake fluid, he dropped it off at the wrong place. So he was like, you know what, I'll just call him tonight, and I'll bring it tomorrow. And so he said he stopped back on his way home and got him. Oh, I probably shouldn't do that because I'm going to drip brake fluid all over myself. But here's the other rear. So he did come back today. He said, yeah, I just got it on my way home. And here you go. So, luckily, I did get them. The cheapest set of Brembos known to man. I believe I told you it was $120 for all 4 calipers. So, let's check out the whole set all together now. I believe they all came from the same car that was being parted out, which was, as I said, a 2001 or 2002. Yeah, I'll do the front and rear view, I guess. 2001 to 2002 Mercedes CL600 with the V12. So these are for a beefy car. And yeah, I mean, pretty simple design here. Can't really lean them up on the back as easily. Oh, maybe I can. So there you go. There's a front and rear view. Try to get a nice setup here. Maybe I'll make this the thumbnail. Yeah, check that out. So, yeah, we'll do a little better. Can do a little better. Here we go. Is this the thumbnail? This one's a little off. This is what YouTubers go through, folks. Got my knife in the background. Like, legitimately, though. Like, that's a joke, but it's not. And if I wanted to, I could actually space them out a little bit better, fill in this image a little bit better, because we want it to be 16:9 aspect ratio. Anyway, there's the brake calipers. Like I said, originally my plan was to use these on the MR2. I have discovered a couple problems with that. I'm not scrapping the idea. That's still what I'd like to do. But so first of all, the MR2 is a mid-engine car, which means it's more, weight balanced. I believe the Mark 1 is pretty close to 50-50. I think it might actually be a little bit rear heavy. And so usually mid-engine cars like Porsches or, Ferraris, the NSX or whatever, have a little more brake bias towards the rear. They're still usually front brakes more powerful than rear because, so obviously, and I'm pretty sure most of you know this, but in case you don't, when a car is moving forward and you hit the brakes, the nose is going to dive, right? And so that means there's more pressure on the front tires, which means that those brakes are going to be doing most of the work when you hit them because you're going to have more grip on those tires. So those brakes can grip up to the limit of the front tires. The rear tires, because the weight of the car is shifting like this, actually have less weight on them, so you have less grip in the rear. And if your rear brakes are too strong, they're just going to lock up the tire, which doesn't actually give you better stopping distance. So when the rear tires lock up, you'll actually just skid across the ground, and that means you've lost your static friction, so you're actually going to stop slower, if you will, go further. So you want the bias to be set up right so that under hard braking, the front end of the car and the rear end of the car are doing both as much work as possible without locking up the brake rotors and therefore the tires. What's up, dog? So the issue with these is that they're clearly for a car with a heavy front, with a V12 up there. And so the rear dual pistons, still really big for rear brakes, that's fine. But the fronts are actually 4 pistons. And the thing is that when you have 4 or 6 or 8 piston calipers, you make the pistons different sizes to actually accommodate how the rotor is traveling through the caliper. So let me see if I can describe this correctly. So you look, Brembo. Man, these things are cool. But and I did weigh these, by the way. I could toss up a picture, but basically each front with these used pads is 13 pounds, and each rear, I believe, with the pads is, I want to say it's only 4 pounds. I don't know. I'll toss up a couple pictures here real quick. But yeah, so without the pads, these things are super light, and the fronts are a little bit heavier because this center section is cast steel, whereas these are aluminum, where the rears are just all aluminum. I mean, literally this thing is so light. But even this isn't really much heavier than a typical floating caliper with like 1 or 2 pistons. So pretty impressive. But so, all right, so it just took me 2 takes to figure out that I'm an idiot. Total of about, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes of rambling, somewhere in there. Basically, let me start over. I don't know exactly what I'll show you and what I'll cut, but here's where we're at. This would be the driver's side front caliper on the Mercedes, and it would be set up with the rotor here spinning this way, counterclockwise when you're going forward, and that would be called a trailing edge caliper because it is set up on the back side of the wheel and the brake rotor. Now, the reason this becomes a problem for the MR2 is because in a trailing edge setup, the bleeder is right here. So when it's oriented this way, that's the high point, and that's how you bleed it. On the MR2, it is set up as a leading edge caliper, which would mean the bleeder is on the bottom. So when it's set up on that side, the rotor would be spinning right here, and the caliper would be clamping down on it that way. So that still works just fine, except that the bleeder's in the wrong orientation. Now, what I could do to fix this, and what I was being an idiot about, is piston size. Is I could put the other side caliper, so this would be the right side caliper for the Mercedes, on the left side of the MR2. And then it would be a leading edge caliper, and the bleeder would be on top. And that would work just fine if this was a dual piston caliper or a certain type of quad piston caliper. However, what you'll find with most 4, 6, 8 piston calipers, and I think I touched on this earlier, but I don't know if I'll cut that, is that they have different size pistons. So you can see that one's larger than that one. This is a 44 millimeter piston. That is a 40 millimeter piston. And the reason for that, and this is what had me so confused, is, again, if we have this set up as a trailing caliper, the rotor is spinning this way. And this is what had me confused. The piston which makes contact with the rotor first when you are braking tends to be smaller because the piston making contact first with the pads, pushing the pads in, is going to have typically more pad wear, because since it's the first one clamping and the frictional force kind of drags that in, and it also creates more heat. Basically, if you had both pistons the same size, you're going to end up with the pads. See, if it clamps the rotor first, if the rotor's coming in this way and you clamp on it, you're going to end up with the pads worn, tapered, and that's not good. So they make the rear piston larger to exert more force to compensate for the extra heat and force on the piston making contact with the rotors first, or the part of the pad making contact with the rotors first. So I was confused because I kept saying the leading piston, which technically would be this one, should be smaller, but it's actually the trailing piston, if you will. Let's just say this was mounted up top on the rotor. Then this would be the rear piston, or the trailing piston, but it would be the one that makes contact with the rotor first when it's spinning forwards. So that's why this piston is smaller and this piston is larger, because this one is going to be doing slightly less work, but it's going to be getting hotter and exerting more force for its size, if you will, more effective force on the rotor. The piston that gets contact second does less of the work. Sorry, I wish I had a better way to articulate it right this second. If I was doing this as a full video, I would have, written it out so it makes perfect, beautiful sense. But I also got really confused and tongue-tied. So the reason that leaves me with an issue is, let's say I wanted to mount this as the leading piston on the right side of the MR2, leading caliper on the right side of the MR2. Now we have the larger piston back here making contact with the rotor first, because the rotor would be spinning this way on the right side of the car. And so this one clamps on the entry side of the rotor, and this one clamps on the exit side of the rotor, and you don't want the smaller piston on the exit side. So not really a good idea to flip sides for the calipers. So my other solution that I've been thinking of is either tapping my own bleeder. So if I did use this as the leading caliper on the driver's side, which would mean that we have the smaller piston back there making contact with the rotor first, I could basically snub this off, drill into it, and make my own brake bleeder by adding a brass fitting there that has a bleeder screw in it. That would solve my problems. Or I can just use it as is, flip it up on the car like this, and bleed it when I need to, and then flip it back down, which isn't as ideal, but we'll see. So that's one problem with all this. I'm sorry if that wasn't as nicely said as I would like it to be. My first take was awesome, except I was giving you bad information, so I wasn't going to do that. The other problem with putting these on the MR2, and like I said, I think I started to touch on this earlier, is that these are pretty small compared to the fronts. I mean, this is pretty normal for a car, but that's the thing, is usually cars are front engine. So these are 42 millimeter pistons. So basically 2 42 millimeter pistons versus 4 pistons, 2 of which are 40 and 2 of which are 44. So those are more or less, it actually probably works out to be about exactly, but more or less double the size of these in terms of the pressure on the pistons. Now the pad area may not be exactly different, so you can see those pads are that size, and yeah, it does look like the pads are about twice the size. So you're basically getting the same pressure, same force per area out of this set of pistons as one set of pistons on that if you average it. So really we have twice as much braking force in the front as the rear before brake proportioning and bias set up on the car. And with a mid-engine car, you want it to be more balanced than that. So the easy solution, if I did use this brake setup, is just to have a proportioning valve that sends more to the rear. But I'm then obviously going to have accelerated pad wear in the rear. Not really a problem, especially considering how easy these are to service and how cheap the pads are for that matter. You literally just pull out this one pin, you flip up this spring, you take out the pads, you put in the new pads, and bingo bango. So as long as I had decent quality rotors, I could probably get a few pad swaps out of them. But yeah, so that's why this isn't ideal for the MR2, is that no matter what, I'm going to end up with some issues other than the custom mounting. Having stronger front brakes, having front brakes that I can't flip the sides with because they're 4-piston with different size pistons, so the bleeding could be difficult, or I have to do some more custom work there. The rears should be considerably easier because, you know, so this would be, on the MR2, it's actually, again, the same thing. It's leading edge calipers, and on the Mercedes, I believe it's trailing edge. And I think the reason for that is because the Mercedes is front heavy, they moved the calipers as far back as possible to transfer more weight towards the rear of the car, whereas in the MR2, because it's rear heavy, they move the calipers towards the front to put more weight on the front of the car. Essentially, they're just trying to balance the handling of the car, because it really doesn't matter where the brake caliper is, except for in terms of center of gravity. So you want it to be lower usually, but they usually don't put it below the center line because you run into some other weirdness there with the brake fluid, you know, in order to make bleeding easy. And also so that they don't get damaged. And you want it to shift the weight of the car front or rear. So the nice thing is, because these are just dual piston and they're the same size, I can switch these side to side. So even if this were a trailing driver's side caliper, because there's the bleeder on the Mercedes, if I just put this on the right side, if I just put this on the right side of the MR2, or actually, let's just pretend you're looking at the right side of the MR2, this would be mounted as a leading caliper, and so now the rotor would be in there going this way when you're driving forward and the bleeder's still up there. So that works. But yeah, so granted, if I'm being completely honest with you, there's almost no way I'll get to this project on the MR2 until, you know, summer would be nice, but I plan on doing the engine swap and everything first. And so beyond the problems I just discussed, I do have to most likely, like almost definitely, make custom mounting brackets for these, which is its own hassle. You know, I'll probably just make them out of steel, custom, one-off. A guy down the road has a mill if I really need it. And then the issue with rotors. So what I'm thinking right this second is using the Sentra front rotors on the rear, since I'll be using the Sentra hubs on the rear, which are 280 millimeter discs, which really isn't bad, and they look like they should have enough area for these pads. And then on the front, I'd probably go with Subaru like 12 to 13 inch calipers, 5x100, and then drill them to have 4x100 bolt patterns so that they match the MR2 hubs. So I'd actually have 5x114.3 rotors in the rear, 4x114.3 and 4x100 in the front, but then use some hub spacers to go to 4x100 in the rear, which will space the tires out a little bit and keep me at the same bolt pattern so I can use the same wheels. This is all really complicated. I won't ramble much more, but just so you guys know what I'm thinking, and if you're into brakes and big brakes and Brembos, at least this is still, you know, an interesting video. This is the kind of stuff that I'm into, so hopefully you're into it too. And yeah, that's where I'm at with these. I'm happy to have them all. They were super cheap. Worst case scenario, if I don't end up using them, I could just sell them for more than I paid for them, honestly, especially if I sold them one at a time or as a front and rear set, or, you know, if I clean them up first, all that stuff. So that's pretty legit. And these would actually be a better setup for the WRX, because we can try to go look at it real quick. But basically the WRX, not only is it more front heavy like the Mercedes, and that's actually much more like what a Brembo setup on a WRX is. It's 4-piston front or 6-piston on the really new ones, I believe, and 2-piston rear. But also, I don't know about the rear. God, there's so much dog poop next to the WRX. But you can see in the front, it is trailing calipers. You can see they put those as far back as they could, basically centered, so that they can be bled properly, but so that the weight is towards the back. So that's the same as the Mercedes. If they mount it up, they mount it up. That'd be sick. And in the rear, again, trailing. So, you know, again, the Mercedes would be easier. And it is also a little bit easier to get larger calipers for the WRX. And here's the other thing that I forgot to mention. So on Subarus, this uses a drum style emergency brake. So it's inside of the brake disc, and the caliper does nothing for the emergency brake. On the MR2, they actually use, so why don't we just go look at the MR2 real quick just so I can show you the differences. On the MR2, they actually use a cable that goes into the back. You can maybe just see it there. I'll try to focus on it. but you can see there's a cable that goes to the back of the caliper. You can see the bracket that was right there. And that actually spins a little caliper, and so the e-brake is done by the rear caliper. You can see how tiny these things are. These wheels are awesome though, right? I still have to make the video on that. But so the issue with that is if I try to use the Mercedes calipers, they do not have a provision for an emergency brake, and there's no way I can convert this to rear drum for the e-brake. So the MR2 would not have an emergency brake unless I added a hydro e-brake inline and then hooked up the original e-brake handle to it, which would be my plan. It's not technically like 100% legal, but considering how much I use the e-brake anyway, doesn't really matter. And again, here's the little tiny caliper in the front, and you can see it's a leading caliper. So I may instead, you know, just for gits and shiggles, see if those Mercedes Brembos would work on the WRX, because that would be, so what people usually do now for WRX conversions is CTS or ATSV Cadillac calipers, which are like, basically the cheapest you can find them is about $120 a caliper for the front right now, and for the rears 110, you know, just a little bit less. So you're still talking just in calipers. I mean, I've seen sets for as cheap as like $420 for all 4 calipers. I paid $120 for these Mercedes. So if these Mercedes Brembos would work on the WRX with just some custom fab, that would be sick. I could, you know, paint them, and then there are cheap options that might work better for the MR2. I'd have to look into it, such as Porsche Boxster especially, or even older 911. So that might be easier. The big problem with the Porsche calipers is usually they don't have the same kind of mounting ears like this. They usually have upward, it's like a British insult, right? But upward mounting bolts. So making the custom brackets to make those work would be a little more weird. I'd have to make a bracket that you bolt in to the hub this way and then bolts in to the caliper that way. But for right now, these will be shelved. They're a long-term goal. Before that, I need to swap the entire engine in the MR2. I need to put the clutch in the WRX. I need to put the transmission in the WRX. All kinds of stuff. So this video ended up being way longer than I planned. I was planning to do some other stuff in it, but I don't know what else to do right this second. So you can see, first of all, this is getting cleaner, getting much nicer. The garage is looking much nicer. On camera, I feel like it never looks better, but I swear I've been doing so much work. I'm getting this area over here cleaned up. I'm going to have that taken out in a second. I'm going to put these 2 worthless racing seats that who knows someday might get used for some kind of death cart or something. Those are going to go into the upstairs with all my other car parts. So that'll clean out some room. Oh yeah, that's all cleaned off as I showed you. So yeah, hope you folks enjoyed this. I know this was another one without my face. I promise it looks the same. As always, if you have any questions about all the nonsense I rambled about in the beginning, I'm sorry that my head was so confused. When I looked at these at first, they looked wrong, and it was just because I was thinking of the rotor entering on the leading edge of the caliper, but of course not. The rotor enters on the trailing edge of the caliper first, and that's why you have the smaller piston to compensate for the excess heat and wear on the trailing edge of the pad, but the part of the pad which makes contact with the rotor first. That was a lot more concise. Hopefully it makes sense. And yeah, man, those brakes are really cool. They're pretty light. Who knows what they'll end up on, but definitely something. I want to put them on something. I could even put them on the V10 Impreza, but since I'm not going to drive that car a lot, no matter what when it's done, most likely, like it'll be for fun, that would seem like kind of a waste. I'd much rather put it on something that's going to see a lot of miles, and I do already have WRX upgraded calipers for the front of that and new brakes for the rear, so you know, but we'll see. Let me know what you guys think. This may be the first Patreon video that I kind of open up to the public, because I am going to make like a few Patreon videos over time, like where they're at least only early release for Patreon, or kind of put them on the Patreon as public, so that if people come to the Patreon, they can see. You get what I'm saying? Just to kind of drive some traffic there. But I don't know, because I wish this had come out a little better quality, but at least it gives an impression of what the Patreon videos are like. I'm going to stop rambling. I really appreciate y'all. Thank you so much. I'll catch you soon, as always, on the 802 Garage, and there will be more official channel videos coming soon. I've just been really trying to bust my butt cleaning this garage, especially now that the snow is melting, and very soon, actually, I will be dragging that thing into the garage to actually do some hardcore work on it. I'll catch you later. So Nava's out there playing in the snow. I guess she thinks she's gonna find food. Oh, it's time to go in. Maybe. But yeah, so I guess I'll throw this in a Patreon video too. This is just ridiculous. It's supposed to get 6 to 12 inches. We have a winter storm warning. Good times, but it is supposed to be warm after this and melts, and then 50s and rain next weekend, which will definitely help reduce the banks. Might be getting close to snow-free by April. Well, Patreon supporters, I know you'll be getting this a little after it happened, but here's all the snow. After everything being completely clear, this is where we're at now. You can't even see the WRX except for a little mirror sticking out. Here's the cars, and then look at how deep this is. I don't know how to like give you a clear picture of that. Maybe I can, like, it's up to my knee. That's all from one day of snowfall, and there's basically 1.5 to 2 feet in front of the garage. I cannot even start to see out of my kitchen window right now, and there is still plenty of snow on the roof to fall off in the next few days. So that's glorious. I don't even know how to get to the damn mailbox. At the edge of the road, you can probably see there is a huge berm. So yeah, I'm basically screwed. Good times. Should mostly melt by next Saturday because it's supposed to be 50s and rainy. It's not supposed to snow again as far as I know, but this is just ridiculous and very discouraging for right this second. But oh well, back to work. Alright, got the driveway pretty well cleared out. This is just ridiculous. Nava better not go in the road. And then you can see, if I check how much snow we got, looks like it's about 15 inches on the hood of the car in this area, which was all clear before. Solid 16 inches of snow we got all in one day, so that's awesome. But Nava, hey! Oh, okay, she's not in the road. She's good. Good girl. She's pretty good about not going in the road, but you never know. Anyway, this really sucks because, as all y'all know, I was getting the garage really well cleaned out inside, and it was all clear out front here. You can see I've opened up the trench again, but still making lots of progress in here, so more to come on that soon. Also, won't lie, I'm pretty miffed about this. I had the GSX completely cleaned off, and now it is completely buried again!